name is Holly Falk-Krzesinski, and I'm the Vice President for Global Academic Relations at Elsevier. And my main role is to work on developing strategic alliances with the U.S. academic institutions and funding bodies. Sex-gender issues come in a multifaceted. We have to think about the biological issues of sex and gender in research, to be sure, but also the sociological and the psychological, and understand that there may even be differences between sex and gender, and an understanding of how those all factor in. So what we already know is that there's a disparity between men and women in top positions. So even in areas and fields where there's an equal number of women and men trainees, as we start to look up into the higher ranks, we see disproportionately high level of men and a disproportionately low level of women. And I think there's a few issues. I think we need to explicitly tackle issues of implicit bias. Right. So we have to be explicit about implicit bias. And we have to recognize that women as well as men carry this implicit bias. So women, first of all, have to agree to take part of the responsibility and can't simply point fingers only at the men and tell them about the wrongdoing that they're involved in. We all have to be responsible, which means that every group, every committee, every task force that is responsible for promoting or assigning or hiring or considering the advancement of individuals into these top-level positions have to be formally trained, I believe. We cannot leave it to people to just do their best. There needs to be formal training, very broadly, in implicit bias. And then I think there's two other important factors for getting women into top-level positions is giving them the skills necessary to function at that level of their organization. And I think a couple of them in particular are understanding how to manage their networks and negotiation skills. Right. Women tend to not negotiate for themselves nearly as well as men do. And I think that's a cultural issue for women. And we also tend not to understand how to have professional networks. We're actually quite good at our social and community networks. It's what makes us very good at serving on parent-teacher organizations and church groups. But we're not very good at manipulating our networks for professional advancement the way that men do so well. So I think some of the topics that we could talk about at gender summits, as we do hear often, is don't try to change the women, change the organization, or change the culture. At the same time, if we understand that there are behaviors, there are approaches that make an individual successful, and if we see that men tend to use that approach and therefore there's wonderful alignment with professional goals, can we make those obvious then for women and explicit that there's approaches they too can participate in? So I'm not suggesting that we change the women, just equipping women with knowledge of what are effective approaches and tactics, as men may also need to be equipped with those, some men. So I think if we could focus some of that on individuals, not the idea of changing the individuals, but rather empowering individuals to take advantage of things that we know through the literature of what are effective tactics at that level.